In the stillness of night, whispers echo where people no longer walk, where shadows remember what history forgot. These are the stories of the places where the veil thins. This is the truth behind the Haunting podcast. During 1973 in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, Jack and Janet Smurl and their family move into their new home, a modest duplex building at 328 to 330 Chase Street. The Smurls were seeking refuge after Hurricane Agnes, and together with their 4 daughters and Jack's parents, they excitedly moved into what should have been a safe beginning. Instead, a nightmare was waiting, one so frightening their lives would never be the same again. With their previous home flooded, and despite renovations having been completed, Jack's parents, John and Mary, need to find a new home, and it was John and Mary that bought the unit. They knew very little about the previous owners. The owner of 328 was an elderly man, and the unit had been empty for a number of years. 330 was owned by an elderly woman who had rented the space out. During the purchase, all checks were carried out, and everything appeared to be in order. John and Mary were to live in 330 and the sold 328 to Jack and Janet. Everyone was happy, and on the 1st October 1973 they moved in. For the first 18 months, everything was good. Jack and Janet and their children were a model family of love and happiness. But this was all about to change. The Smurls would start to report disquieting activity, knocking noises, foul stenches, their dog hurled across a room by unseen forces, their youngest daughter being pushed downstairs, events that compounded their fear. Activity in these early times was more subtle, nothing like what was to follow, but it was disturbing all the same.
Beginning stages of infestation. When people have a haunting that's going to occur, a really bad one, these are all the things that occur to those people. Doors opening and closing, footsteps, psychic cold spots, hearing what we call magic whispering. These are all the beginning stages, Tony.
But they're minor by comparison to what's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
In January 1974, Mary purchased a new carpet. When the fitters laid it out in its intended home, Mary saw that there was a large grease stain. Mary and John cleaned the stain, and it was completely removed, only for it to reappear in a couple of days. This pattern would repeat until they threw out the carpet and bought a new one with no further stains presenting. Jack reported that whilst watching TV one night, and without warning, the TV caught fire. Random fires went on to become an ongoing issue in the home, with a new stove catching fire shortly after its purchase, and days after Jack bought a new car, it burst into flames too. Huge renovation projects were carried out on both homes. John, who was an experienced welder, soldered a number of pipe joints only for them to leak once the water was turned on. John soldered the pipes a second time, and again they leaked. Plumbing repairs become a really problem, with easy jobs becoming very difficult to repair and having to be done several times over.
Smurls were the all-American family, really. You know, they were civic-minded. They had, in fact, Jack Smurl had started the first girls basketball team in West Pittston. They were all around American family. So people would say, well, what did they do to open up the doors? They didn't do anything. They are what we call the chosen ones. When I say chosen ones, this family here, very religiously oriented, good Catholics, good Christians, were picked for one purpose. God wanted to show his power over evil, and these were the people he did it through.
Following the installation of new sinks and bath, they awoke to ugly and disturbing scratches all over that were beyond repair. Over the years, they would experience many incidents that at first would amuse them, like toilets being flushed, radios turning on, even when not plugged in, footsteps upstairs, drawers opening and closing. By 1977, twins Shannon and Karen joined the family, but activity continued. Things in the two homes started to escalate. Janet started to hear her name being called out even when no one was home. Things took a dark turn when Janet was carrying out house chores, when she felt a sudden chill in the room. Looking up for the source of the chill was the first time she saw the black, human-shaped, featureless form. She described the form as more of a thick, dark smoke. She could see through it. Janet would describe how it had a strange but not offensive odor, It seemed to be at a height of 5 foot 9 inches and would glide rather than appearing to walk. Mary would later share with Janet that she had seen the black figure too. In an attempt to escape the increasing activity in their home, Jack and Janet decided to take the family on a weekend camping trip. A couple of days away from whatever was happening would do them good. Neighbors agreed to keep an eye on the unit for them, and all was well. However, that Saturday would change that and leave some of the Smurls' neighbors frightened even to this day. Neighbors reported that after it got dark, they heard what sounded like birds fluttering from one of the second-story windows. Then came screams. So disturbing, they were described as though someone was being axed to death inside the temporarily empty building. The most disturbing claim in the Smurl Haunting was Jack Smurl's repeated reports of being assaulted by what he described as a succubus, a demonic female entity.
Again,
it's awful.
Jack is calling it a she here. It's an it. It's not a she. It's not a he. It's something that has never walked this earth. It's something horrible, ugly, filthy. It doesn't enjoy the sexual act. It's an insult to God's birthing act. That's what it's all about.
But if you ever
the creation of birth, it's an insult to it.
But if you ever met Jack.
Oh, he didn't want to even describe this or talk about it.
And if you ever met the type of man he was, to have that happen to him.
In fact, when he would go on a couple of national shows, these talk hosts thought it was a big joke, and they'd start joking about it. He was humiliated, of course. And he didn't want to talk about this at all. He said, I don't want to talk about the succubus attacks. But I know for a fact that even after he left the first house, that he was attacked on at least 6 other occasions similarly.
According to both Jack and his wife Janet, the attacks often occurred at night, leaving him feeling paralyzed, scratched, and violated by an unseen force. Jack stated that the entity would pin him down, sometimes taking on a shadowy, human-like form, and sexually assault him despite his efforts to resist. These alleged encounters became a central focus of the Warrens' investigation, as they interpreted the incidents as classic signs of a demonic infestation, escalating into possession attempts. For skeptics, however, the attacks raised difficult questions about psychological stress, possible sleep paralysis, or sexual trauma manifesting in frightening experiences. The succubus assaults, detailed in Robert Curran's book The Haunted, remain one of the most sensational and controversial aspects of the Smurl family's claims, embodying the line between documented paranormal phenomena and the deeply personal terror of those who believe themselves targeted. Another most unsettling account from the Smurl Haunting came from Janet Smurl herself, who reported being assaulted by an unseen force immediately after moments of intimacy with her husband Jack. According to Janet, just as the couple settled back into bed, a sudden oppressive presence filled the room. The mattress shook violently, the air turned cold, and she felt invisible hands tugging at her body, pinning her down. She later described the attack as a deliberate attempt to humiliate and degrade her in the most private part of her marriage. In Robert Curran's The Haunted, Janet recalled a chilling sense that the entity wanted to rob them of closeness and sow fear between husband and wife. For Ed and Lorraine Warren, these assaults were evidence of a demon's aim to corrupt love and destroy family bonds. Skeptics, however, have suggested that stress, suggestibility, and even psychosomatic responses might have shaped the terrifying memory. Still, Janet never wavered in her testimony, insisting that the assault was as real as any physical violation, leaving her shaken and deeply scarred. Desperate to bring an end to the haunting, Jack and Janet reached out to family friend Father Sean Malone. They invited him for dinner and shared their concerns and experiences with him. Father Malone took what they told him seriously and went throughout the house blessing each room. It was as he went upstairs in the home that he was aware of an immense presence of something evil within the home. After the blessings of Father Malone, there was a brief respite for the Smurls. However, several weeks later the activity had built up again, and this time the Smurls reached out to Monsignor Hugh Byrne. Like Father Malone, Monsignor Byrne carried out blessings to each of the rooms, and again this brought a short respite for a few days before returning in earnest. By 1986, after enduring years of torment, the Smurls enlisted famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. They reported hearing loud rapping, seeing dark masses, feeling sudden temperature drops, and even witnessing a message scrawled on a mirror: "Get out." By the time the Warrens became involved, the Smurl family had experienced nearly a decade of unexplained disturbances in their West Pittston duplex, having great difficulty getting help from the church. Jack and Janet Smurl reached out beyond their parish priests and the Diocese of Scranton. They contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, the Connecticut-based demonologists who had already gained international attention through their work on the Amityville case, 1975, and dozens of other hauntings. Their grandson, Chris McKinnell, was one of the first to enter the home, spending many hours gathering initial data and evidence for Ed and Lorraine. His time there, Chris noted heavy rappings, sounds of animal hooves, scratchings, drops in temperatures, and reported the sound of pigs, which was perhaps symbolic of a demonic presence. During the initial investigations, the Warrens visited the Smurl home several times, sometimes accompanied by associates from the New England Society for Psychic Research. Lorraine, who claimed clairvoyant sensitivity, reported seeing dark masses moving through the house and feeling an inhuman presence. Ed, a self-described demonologist, conducted interviews and recorded audio tapes. On these recordings, he claimed to capture loud rappings and knockings in direct response to questions, what he described as intelligent communication from a demonic source. The Warrens also claimed that the family endured classic markers of infestation: sudden foul odors, especially sulfur, moving objects, oppressive cold spots, and violent physical attacks. They specifically pointed to the alleged sexual assaults on Jack and Janet, describing them as evidence of a demonic entity escalating from harassment to domination. It is reported that the Warrens attempted minor exorcism rites and urged the Smurls to increase their prayers. They also pushed for diocesan involvement, lobbying the church for a formal exorcism. While the diocese did send priests to bless the house, it stopped short of a sanctioned solemn exorcism, citing lack of evidence. Ed, clearly frustrated, publicly criticized the church for hesitancy. The Warrens' presence ensured that the haunting moved from a local curiosity into a national story. They brought in reporter Robert Curran, who helped the Smurls co-author The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare, 1988. In interviews, the Warrens framed the case as one of the most violent infestations they had ever encountered, often likening it to Amityville in intensity. When Ed and Lorraine Warren concluded that the Smurl family was under siege from a non-human demonic force, they sought help from one of the few Catholic priests they believed would intervene directly: Father Robert F. McKenna, a Dominican priest from Connecticut, known for his willingness to perform traditional Latin exorcisms. Father McKenna was sympathetic to the Warrens' work and had been involved in other controversial cases. At the Warrens' request, Father McKenna traveled to the Smurl home and performed a solemn rite of exorcism. According to the Smurls and the Warrens, the ritual caused a violent reaction in the house: loud bangings, foul smells, and an oppressive heaviness that seemed to intensify as prayers were read. Janet reported that the walls shook and that she felt a suffocating presence pressing against her. Despite the intensity of the rite, the family claimed the disturbances continued unabated within days. Convinced the first exorcism had not been enough, the Warrens again asked Father McKenna to return. This second exorcism was said to be longer and more forceful, with Father McKenna invoking Saint Michael and commanding the entity to leave in the name of Christ. Once more, however, the family reported only temporary relief. Activity lessened briefly, but returned in waves: noises, apparitions, and physical assaults. In subsequent months, Father McKenna performed 2 further exorcisms, each arranged with the Warrens' urging and conducted with the Smurls' participation. By this point, the haunting had become a media spectacle, and Father McKenna's involvement added to the sense that the family was enduring something extraordinary. Yet despite the 4 separate rituals, the disturbances persisted, convincing Ed and Lorraine that the demon was deeply entrenched and unusually resistant to expulsion.
I think the reason that it didn't do is because God wasn't yet ready to show his power. His power was to come, and in a great way.
Oh, yes.
The exorcisms became central to the Smurl case because they highlighted both the seriousness with which the Warrens treated the family's plight and the limits of clerical intervention. For believers, the failure of 4 exorcisms underscored the case's authenticity, evidence of an especially powerful entity. For skeptics, however, it demonstrated that nothing was really happening beyond suggestion, because no independent corroboration ever confirmed the phenomena Father McKenna was said to encounter. The Warrens later described the Smurl exorcisms as among the most difficult of their career, with the demon seemingly moving around the house to resist the rites. Father McKenna himself, though he did not publicly dwell on the case, reportedly told confidants that he believed the family was indeed afflicted by something inhuman. The Smurls eventually moved from 328 Chase Street in 1987, and later occupants reported no unusual phenomena, leaving the effectiveness of the exorcisms and the truth of the haunting a matter of lasting debate. The Smurls turned to the church, but their pleas were met with skepticism. Several priests blessed the home, one even stayed with the family for 2 nights, but reported nothing unusual. For much of the Smurl haunting, the Diocese of Scranton was hesitant to intervene in any formal way. While priests were dispatched to bless the home and hear the family's confessions, diocesan officials remained cautious, stating publicly that they had found no clear evidence of demonic activity. The Smurls, however, insisted the disturbances were escalating and that nothing short of a sanctioned exorcism would end their suffering. After Ed and Lorraine Warren's repeated appeals, and following months of growing media scrutiny, the church finally authorized a formal exorcism of the duplex at 328 Chase Street, conducted under the authority of the Scranton Diocese and in accordance with the Ritual Romanum. The rite marked the church's most serious acknowledgement of the family's claims. Accounts described the exorcist priest, whose name was never officially released by the diocese, reciting the prescribed prayers of deliverance, invoking the power of Christ and St. Michael to banish the entity. Holy water was sprinkled throughout each room, relics and crucifixes were placed strategically, and the home was sealed in prayer. During the rite, the Smurls claimed the house reacted violently. Knocks reverberated through the walls, the foul smell of sulfur returned, and an unseen force lashed out at those present. At one point, Janet reported feeling a crushing weight on her chest, as though the entity were attempting to resist its expulsion. Unlike the 4 earlier exorcisms arranged by the Warrens with Father McKenna, this church-authorized ritual appeared to bring lasting relief. Within weeks, the family reported that the activity had subsided almost completely. By the time the Smurls moved out in 1987, the violent disturbances were said to have ended. Subsequent residents of the house told reporters they experienced no unusual phenomena at all, which further fueled debate. To believers, this was proof that the exorcism had succeeded in cleansing the property. To skeptics, it suggested there had never been anything to exorcise in the first place. The church-approved exorcism stands as the climactic spiritual intervention in the Smurl haunting. It highlighted the contrast between the Warrens' aggressive demonological approach and the diocese's slow, methodical caution. For the Smurls, it was vindication that their cries for help were finally taken seriously. For critics, it remained an ambiguous gesture performed more to calm a desperate family than to confront supernatural evil.
One man that we never even knew, who was in Rome, who studied to be a Roman Catholic priest, who left just before ordination, but had made many contacts in Rome during that period of time. He left because of health reasons within his family. He has a huge Catholic bookstore in New York City. He read the book. He was appalled by what he read. He wrote a letter and sent the book to Cardinal Ratzinger at the Vatican. We got a copy of that in the mail. We went down to the Smurl home. The very night that we got that, we were going down there for dinner with them. And now they had moved to Wilkes-Barre. So we kind of laughed about it. Yeah, imagine.
Right.
Nobody else is helping. Why is Rome going
Why
to...
would Rome listen to this man
Yeah. Who
sending
is
a
this
letter?
man?
But God works in strange ways.
So,
Cardinal Ratzinger took the bull by the horns, got an exorcist. They sent him right there to the
Holy
Smurl
Week.
home.
it was done Holy
And
Week.
here's the kicker. The very priest that didn't want to help them in the beginning told them that he didn't want to be bothered. There's a knock on the door. Mrs. Smurl opens up the door. Here's the priest, got a box of candy in his hands. Well, Mrs. Smurl, how are you?
He's being
Well,
nice.
I've got
Even the
some
bishop came.
good news for you. And they don't understand why this guy's there, because he wasn't going to give them any help. I brought you a little gift, a box of candy, and he said, the good news is that Rome is intervening for you. Cardinal Ratzinger is having an exorcist sent to your home. That exorcist was sent there, the home was cleared, and the family has lived happily ever since. That was not in the book, The Haunted,
No.
because at that time there was no closing.
By the summer of 1986, the Smurl Haunting had exploded beyond the quiet streets of West Pittston and into the national spotlight. What began as whispers of strange noises and foul odours soon became headline news, thanks in large part to Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement and the family's willingness to speak publicly about their ordeal. Newspapers like the Times Leader and Scranton Tribune first broke the story locally, but within weeks, wire services such as UPI and the Associated Press were carrying the Smurls' claims nationwide. Television crews descended on Chase Street. News vans lined the road outside the modest duplex, and curious onlookers gathered daily, hoping to catch a glimpse of something supernatural. Some neighbors supported the family, insisting they too had felt strange sensations near the house. Others grew weary of the constant attention, complaining about the circus-like atmosphere that disrupted the community. The Warrens amplified the case, appearing on talk shows and in interviews, describing the haunting as one of the most violent they had ever encountered. This fueled public fascination and skepticism. Crowds sometimes hurled insults at the Smurls, accusing them of seeking fame or fabricating the story for profit. The situation escalated to the point where vandals threw rocks and bricks through the family's windows, forcing them to endure not only the alleged haunting, but also harassment from outsiders. The controversy deepened with the 1988 release of the book The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare, written with journalist Robert Curran. The book quickly drew national attention and was followed by the 1991 made-for-TV movie The Haunted. Both cemented the Smurls story in American paranormal lore, but also invited harsher scrutiny from skeptics and clergy alike. Paul Kurtz of CSI Cop dismissed the case as a hoax or delusion, urging psychiatric evaluation for the family, while the Diocese of Scranton continued to insist no conclusive evidence of demonic activity had ever been found. For the Smurls, the media frenzy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought validation, showing they were not suffering in silence. On the other, it made them a public spectacle, targets of ridicule, doubt, and hostility. In later interviews, Janet and her daughters lamented that they had never sought profit or attention, only relief from a torment they described as very real. The Smurl Haunting thus became not just a story of alleged supernatural terror, but a case study in how media attention can magnify and distort paranormal claims, turning a family's private nightmare into a very public trial. While Ed and Lorraine Warren, the Smurls, and their supporters described the case as one of the most violent demonic infestations in American history, skeptics were unconvinced. Almost from the moment the story broke in 1986, paranormal researchers, psychologists, and clergy who doubted demonic explanations offered alternative readings of the events. The most vocal critic was Paul Kurtz, chairman of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, CSICOP, now CSI. In a widely circulated article in Skeptical Inquirer, 1987, Kurtz dismissed the haunting as either a hoax or the result of psychological delusions. He highlighted several key problems. The lack of independent evidence. While the Warrens claimed to have audio recordings of knocks and rappings, these were never released for peer review. No photographs or verifiable physical evidence supported the more extraordinary claims. Jack Smurl's medical history. In 1983, Jack underwent surgery for fluid on the brain caused by meningitis. Kurtz suggested this could have contributed to hallucinations or memory disturbances, especially under stress. The declined psychological evaluation. Kurtz noted that respected psychologist Dr. Robert Gordon had offered to evaluate the Smurls free of charge, but the family refused, leading skeptics to argue they feared a natural explanation would disprove their claims. The Catholic Church's own stance added weight to skeptical views, although the diocese sent priests to bless the house and even dispatched one to live in the home for 2 nights. No unusual activity was reported during clerical presence. Official diocesan statements repeatedly stressed that while the family was sincere, the evidence did not warrant a formal recognition of demonic possession until much later, and even then, the Church's involvement remained cautious and restrained. Other skeptics pointed to the psychological stress of living in a crowded home. Jack and Janet, their 4 daughters, and Jack's parents all shared the duplex, combined with financial pressures and health concerns. Such conditions, they argued, could lead to collective delusions, hysteria, or misinterpretations of ordinary household noises and smells. Sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations were also raised as possible explanations for the reported succubus attacks. Perhaps the strongest skeptical argument came after the Smurls left 328 Chase Street in 1987. The new residents, including Deborah Owens, reported no strange activity whatsoever. For critics, this was damning. If the house had truly been plagued by a powerful demonic presence, it was unlikely that it would cease entirely with new occupants. For believers, the counter-argument was that the entity had been attached to the Smurls personally, not the house. Skeptics also emphasized the role of media amplification. Once the Warrens became involved and the story was picked up by national outlets, the haunting narrative may have spiraled, with each telling becoming more sensational. The 1988 book and 1991 TV film reinforced the demonic frame, making it difficult to separate fact from embellishment. By 1987, after more than a decade of alleged torment and 4 failed exorcisms arranged with Father McKenna, the Smurl family had reached breaking point. The official church-approved exorcism finally took place under the authority of the Diocese of Scranton. According to the Smurls and the Warrens, this ritual succeeded where the others had failed. The oppressive noises, smells, and physical attacks reportedly ceased, and for the first time in years, the family could sleep without fear. Within months, the Smurls left 328 Chase Street and settled in a new home, free at last from what they described as a demonic infestation. The haunting left scars. Jack and Janet consistently maintained their story, often repeating that they had never sought fame or financial gain. In later interviews, Janet lamented how the family was treated by skeptics and the press, insisting the attacks were real and that the ridicule compounded their suffering. Their daughters carried the memory of the ordeal into adulthood, each with their own perspective on what they had endured as children in that house. For the Warrens, the Smurl case became a cornerstone in their catalogue of demonic hauntings. They frequently referenced it as an example of an extraordinary infestation that tested both the family and the church. In 1988, the publication of The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare by Robert Curran helped cement the case in paranormal history, while the 1991 television adaptation brought it to an even wider audience. Yet the legacy remains contested. Skeptics like Paul Kurtz and Dr. Robert Gordon argued that the case revealed more about stress, medical history, and suggestibility than the supernatural. The fact that later occupants of 328 Chase Street reported no unusual phenomena is often cited as proof that nothing was ever there. For believers, however, that absence is explained by the exorcism's success. The demon was cast out and peace restored. Jack Smurl's death in 2017 brought renewed attention to the case, with obituaries recalling his steadfast insistence that his family's ordeal had been genuine. Today, paranormal enthusiasts, scholars, and skeptics continue to revisit the Smurl Haunting in books, podcasts, and documentaries. The story is also woven into pop culture through comparisons with the Conjuring universe, as Ed and Lorraine's involvement links it to their larger body of work. In the end, the Smurl Haunting endures as both a cautionary tale and a cultural touchstone. For some, a chilling reminder of unseen evil. For others, a case study in belief, psychology, and media sensationalism. The truth may never be fully resolved, but the story continues to echo, just as the knocks on the walls of 328 Chase Street once did. So what happened? Was it demonic infestation, psychological breakdown, hoax, or a tragic confluence of stress, media, and belief? The church saw no evidence. The Warrens documented phenomena. Skeptics cited medical and social factors. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a blend of unexplained events and human interpretation. Nearly 4 decades after the events on Chase Street, the Smurl Haunting remains one of the most debated cases in American paranormal history. Theories abound, reflecting the divide between those who believe in the supernatural and those who search for earthly explanations. For the Smurls and for Ed and Lorraine Warren, there was no doubt. The family had been the target of a powerful demonic entity. The alleged succubus assaults, the mocking voices, and the resistance to multiple exorcisms fit the classic progression described in demonology: infestation, oppression, and attempted possession. Supporters point to the family's consistency in retelling their story, their lack of financial gain, and their willingness to endure public ridicule as evidence of sincerity. To believers, the Church's eventual authorization of a solemn exorcism is tacit recognition that something extraordinary was happening. Whether one accepts the Smurl Haunting as evidence of demonic evil, a tragic mix of stress and suggestion, or a story amplified by media and culture, the case reveals profound truths about human experience. It demonstrates how fear can spread through a family and a community, how belief and doubt collide, and how private suffering can become public spectacle. For the Smurls, the haunting was real, its impact on their lives undeniable, regardless of explanation. For skeptics, the case serves as a reminder to test extraordinary claims with compassion and critical inquiry. In the end, the Smurl Haunting endures as a riddle suspended between faith and skepticism. Perhaps its greatest legacy is not in proving the existence of demons or dismissing them, but in showing how fragile the line can be between the haunted mind and the haunted house. Thanks for joining us on the Truth Behind the Haunting podcast. If you enjoyed our journey into the supernatural, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with fellow ghost seekers. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and stay aware of what moves in the shadows.